This is I Don't Speak German. I'm Jack Graham, he, him, and in this podcast, I talk to my friend Daniel Harper, also he, him, about what he learned from years of listening to today's Nazis, white nationalists, white supremacists, and what they say to each other when they don't think we're listening. Be warned, this is difficult subject matter. Content warnings always apply. And it's 87. We're so close.
So close. We're just going to skip 88, right? Isn't that the plan at this point?
Yeah.
Just don't do 88. No, we have a plan for 88. But
well, we're going to have a conceptual episode 88.
Conceptual 88, yes. Much like a conceptual penis, although much less pleasant than.
Very much so. Yeah.
Well, depending on your opinions on penises, I guess. Yeah.
Well, this is it. I mean, I think our show is very much like, a penis every week. It's incredibly useful and enjoyable.
But not for everyone. I think we should be clear about that before we get it.
But not for everyone.
Erasure, But no, that's where we are. And we should probably highlight our topic for this week, which is James Lindsay.
Yeah. Before we get into that, I do have a couple of things I want to say first. Firstly, in the last episode, I made a factual error. I attributed the phrase palingenetic ultranationalism to Robert Paxton, and it actually comes from Griffin, not Paxton. And also, I was mistaken to raise it at all because Thought Slime doesn't even use the phrase. So it's it's a fuck-upception there on Jack's part. The other thing I need to say is that I had my first vaccine yesterday.
Yep. How are you feeling?
Well, this is it. I felt fine initially.
Yep.
But it's more than 24 hours. Yeah, it's more like 30 hours now. And I'm a bit groggy.
Sure.
I thought I'd gotten away with it. I thought 24 hours went by and I thought, I got away with it. And then I started to feel really, really tired and a bit muddle-headed and, more than usual, obviously.
Right.
And it's a bit better now, but I should probably apologize in advance because I might be a little bit subpar this episode, but it's fine because Daniel has a lot to get through. So it's actually going to be better because there'll be less of me interrupting with irrelevant, excursions into ephemera. So
the less you talk, the more people have to listen to James Lindsay talk, and I can promise you they would much prefer having your voice than his, although we do have kind of a defined amount of James Lindsay material here, so it just kind of you can intersperse more of your talking to make it easier on the listeners. But if the vaccine, if Bill Gates is doing that to our audience, then I guess we're just gonna have to live with it.
Yeah, it's those Bill Gates nanobots coursing through my bloodstream. It's making me a little... So I think really preferable to James Lindsay clips would just be me sort of going... So I might just do that. Anyway, so episode 87, James Lindsay, and this is the first of a projected, I think, 3-part series on James Lindsay.
At least 3. We will not be doing them in order. We will be interspersing other things in the middle, just to not focus relentlessly on James Lindsay. But we will.
Why wouldn't anybody want to do that?
We will be doing at least 3, if not 4 episodes on James Lindsay. And if you knew the amount of material that I dug through for this episode, then you would understand, because this may be our longest episode to date, or at least one of them. And I'm literally mostly only covering the years between 2014 and 2017. Like, that's how much stuff. And we're only scratching the surface. So
yeah, this is the first of a trilogy. This is Lindsay Begins.
Yes. So James Lindsay, let's just start.
So James
here.
Lindsay, yeah.
Let's just start here, just because I'm going to have to talk a lot. How would you summarize James Lindsay from what you know about it?
Professional reactionary these days.
Pretty much, yeah.
Look, I mean, it's a bit like Eric and Brett again. James Lindsay is obviously a very intelligent man. This man has a PhD in mathematics. Now, let me say at the outset, that is not something I am capable of doing. Okay, so I take my hat off to James Lindsay. He has made an intellectual achievement that I'm simply not. I'm not in the running for that. So great, well done. The trouble is that now he seems, at least to me, maybe you'll disagree, Daniel, I don't know, but he seems, at least to me, to have become a self-promoter and a culture warrior for the right. And as I say, basically a professional reactionary and a charlatan. That's how he comes over.
I would
and
agree
a bully,
with
an online bully as well.
That was the thing I was really going to highlight. First of all, if you know of James Lindsay and you're on Twitter, you probably know him because he has bullied you or someone you know at some point on Twitter. Yeah. He is amazingly prolific at Twitter and at being an asshole to everyone he meets on Twitter. We're going to not really cover that in so many details, but we're going to explain how I think he got there in this episode, how he gets to that point. He's also...
It's his business model now. I mean, let's be honest. It's how he drums up clicks and engagement. He's an asshole to people on Twitter, and it's it's an essential part of his job, which is to be a professional reactionary provocateur. I'm using the term reactionary because, of course, he self-identifies as a liberal. So calling him a conservative is kind of... it's kind of inaccurate, at least in terms of his self-definition. And I think he actually does, he at least purports to support some liberal policies. But he's certainly a reactionary, and he's in bed with extreme reactionaries.
Yeah, absolutely. He is currently in bed with Sovereign Nations founder, what's his name, Michael O'Fallon.
Yeah.
Which is... and apparently O'Fallon is kind of a big part of the New Discourses project, which is where James spends much of his time today. We will again cover that in a future episode because I just don't have time for it today. But like, if you know him, you know him as this kind of anti-woke, anti-critical race theory person. He does a ton of interviews on like every right-wing dipshit's show he can possibly imagine. If you go and search for him on YouTube, you will find endless hours of content of him mocking the left, mocking social justice warriors, critical race theorists, and spewing a bunch of horseshit about postmodernists and leftist theorists that he pretends to understand, but does not. Yeah. He is also, in 2019, the co-author of a book with Helen Pluckrose entitled Cynical Theories, which is basically a giant piece of dog shit. I'm in the process of reading it now. But yeah,
well, it's kind of the next step in his quest to be a SoCal tribute act, because of course SoCal published the original SoCal hoax in the 90s.
Right.
It's not our subject, so I won't go into it. But SoCal hoaxed a postmodernist, to use the term loosely, journal with a completely fake paper talking about physics. SoCal was a physicist, I believe. And then that caused a big furor. And we might talk about this another time, so I'm just going to skip over it here. But he followed it up with a book that he co-wrote with a guy called Jean Brinkmont, which it's got different titles depending on where you read it. My copy is called Intellectual Impostures. And the move on the part of the quote-unquote grievance studies hoaxers to then, get their PR splashed with SoCal Squared or grievance studies hoax, whatever you want to call it, and then move on to write their book about it. It just, to me, it looks like being a bad SoCal tribute act.
Yeah, no, and in fact, he often references SoCal explicitly in terms of what his kind of project has been since late 2017. And you're right, you call out the grievance studies hoax, the so-called Squared hoax. That's the other thing that people are mostly aware of him from. We're going to again talk about how he got there, about what the thing that he did that leads into that project, the smaller scale version of the so-called Squared hoax. And in fact, I think we're going to listen to some audio of him figuring out what he has to do the grievance studies hoax. So let's get into it. But you are correct. He does have a PhD in mathematics. He got a bachelor's degree in physics, and then a master's degree and a PhD in mathematics. I have linked to his PhD dissertation if you care to read a title combinatorial unification of binomial-like arrays. You can read it for free on the Tennessee on the UT, website. So if you choose to do so, that is certainly open to you.
I might wait for the movie version. I don't know.
I have a minor in mathematics, and I am vaguely aware of those terms. Like this is once you get above Calc 4, which is kind of what you need to do the minor, to do like kind of basic science. Once you get above that, you get into like very abstract theory, and they start to use jargon that no one outside of their fields really understands. I understand what kind of all those words mean separately, but not how to put them together in a, I couldn't tell you what that paper is just based on reading it. I have glanced at the paper and I can kind of Google the terms and kind of go, yeah, I kind of know vaguely what this is, but I would not be able to understand that paper based on my own understanding of mathematics. This is going to come back, if not in this episode, and when we actually do the grievance studies episodes, because James Lindsay, it turns out, has spent a lot of time trying to infiltrate fields that he has no understanding of.
Yeah.
And thinks and chooses to mock them despite the fact that he has no concept of them. So anyway,
I wanted to hit I'll let you get on, but I wanted to hit the note about him being a maths PhD and obviously being an intelligent guy, because you can't have a maths PhD if you're not an intelligent guy, at least with regards to maths. You've got to have a functioning brain to achieve that. I wanted to hit that note firstly to sound the proper level of humility, I suppose, because I think we're going to spend quite a lot of this criticizing him. So I didn't want to sound like I'm setting myself up as some sort of rival intellectual. It's always good to acknowledge other your opponent's achievements when they have them. And the other thing I want to establish that this is a bright guy, because to me it means that when he deliberately games the system to create these hoaxes, and when he deliberately misrepresents fields of study and writers in those fields of study and et cetera, to me, a guy that intelligent, he must know on some level what he's doing.
Oh yeah, no, it's pretty clear that he knows exactly what the fuck he's doing.
Yeah. So really, I was paying him a compliment so that I could then prove that he's basically a charlatan, a con man.
I think he does believe what he's saying on some level. I don't think that he's fraudulent in that way. I think he believes it fanatically. But this is the paradox of fanatics. They engage in conscious fraud in order to prove the things that they believe fanatically. So this is a good excuse to dive into our first clip, which is our shortest clip. Thank you. And this is from the Joe Rogan Experience with Peter Boghossian, who is one of his partners in crime on the grievance studies hoax.
Yeah, Peter Boghossian, friend of Stefan Molyneux,
who we will talk about to some detail here in a few minutes. But this is only about 25 seconds long, and it is when Joe Rogan asked James Lindsay in 2019, tell me about yourself. This is what James Lindsay said.
Tell me what you guys did.
Jim, go for it.
Yeah, so let's explain who you guys are and what you do.
Yeah. Okay.
My background is in mathematics. I bailed out on academia in 2010, though, because I kind of see the writing on the wall. And so now I am a renegade gender scholar, and I write nonsense about genitals. That's primarily what I do. I mean, I manage a business at home, so I got out of academia.
Interesting bits here. First of all, he admits that he basically got done in his academic career and realized he graduated with a PhD from UT in mathematics, which is perfectly acceptable. I have no reason to doubt the quality of his education or the quality of his knowledge or his experience, but you enter that field and there are at least 200 applicants for every single tenure track job offering. You end up spending 10 years as a postdoc, and maybe you end up teaching intro level calculus at a small state school in the middle of North Dakota or something similar. This isn't, you don't have attractive career prospects here, right? And so what he seems to have done is to gotten out of academia. Maybe he was teaching. He was doing some. It's unclear to me exactly kind of where he was kind of making his money from this time forward. But he leaves school. He starts writing books. He gets involved in movement atheism in a real way. And he wrote several books. some of which look, kind of vaguely interesting. I mean, he wrote one about, kind of the nature of God in comparison to the nature of infinity from mathematics, which looks like it's actually called ... And if I was going to read one, like just for my own interest, that would probably be the one, because it would be interesting to me to see what he was saying. He did talk about these books on numerous podcasts, and well, we'll get into one of the reviews of one of these books here in a little bit, but he seems to have been a fairly anodyne kind of post Dawkins, post that kind of first wave of new atheism, new atheist thinker. And his big kind of perspective is, look, new atheism is kind of done. We won the argument. We as atheists won the argument culturally. And now we need to just kind of move forward and stop arguing about the existence or non-existence of God. Stop, arguing with creationists and start trying to build something of our own. I would have that's a reasonable conversation to have, right? That is not an unreasonable point of view. I would disagree with a lot of that, like I don't have to take that 100% seriously, but that's kind of where he ends up between about 2010 and 2014 and later. And we're going to play a lot of clips from this podcast, which was originally called Atheistically Speaking. This is a guy named Tom Smith who's been running this podcast since 2014. And then at some point in late 2017, it shifted to being called Serious Inquiries Only. I have included in the show notes every single episode James Lindsay appeared on. There are quite a few of them. And in some of these cases, he's kind of talking about social war issues. And in some cases, he's talking about his books and his kind of like work in atheism. If you want to go check those out, feel free to do so. I've given you the clips. I've given you the links, at least. We are not going to be listening to anything of James Lindsay talking about his work within atheism. We're only going to be focusing on the stuff that's a little bit more in our wheelhouse. But I've given you the place to kind of look at that if you want to. That said, before we kind of start digging into the history, I think there's one more thing we should look at in terms of understanding James Lindsay as he is now. And that is, as you say, a reactionary kind of cultural commentator who is very, very comfortable in right-wing environments. And when I say very, very comfortable in right-wing environments, what I mean is he literally attended CPAC 2021, CPAC being the Conservative Political Action Conference, i.e., this is where all the Republicans go to tell each other how great they are. He did not, as far as I can tell, actually speak on stage at the event, but he gave at least one interview from behind the scenes. And these are also like kind of big hobnobbing events for people who are going to be kind of big in kind of Republican Party politics moving forward. He currently is a noted expert in critical race theory, speaking to state legislatures and state representatives in the United States in terms of getting them to ban critical race theory, et cetera, from, he is very active as a right-wing political actor at this point. All right. So I'm going to play this clip, and I promise you, I am not here to make our leftist audience tear their hair out for all of the complete bullshit that I'm about to throw at you, because
I think there's a certain masochism involved in, if you're listening to this, I think you want to be tearing your hair out to a certain degree.
Right.
So enjoy.
I mean, and this is like, if you want to know what it's like to do the work that I do, this like this for like 8 hours a day is kind of like, what I'm doing. I actually really regret. I mean, we had several listeners say, stop speeding up the clips, just play them at 1x speed. It's too fast for me. I feel like this guy is so much more painful at 1x speed than he is at like 1.5 or 2x, which is where I'm usually at listening to him.
Yeah.
But anyway, this is a segment of an interview he gave at CPAC 2021 just a few weeks ago as we record this. This is about 2 minutes and 17 seconds long. And I'm just going to say, don't think about the content too hard. It will hurt your head. It will he's going to throw in a bunch of names. He's going to connect things that don't deserve to be connected. There's no sinew on these bones whatsoever. But this gives you a real sense of what James Lindsay sounds like and what his speaking style is like today. And what we're going to do in this podcast episode, to some degree, is to track the evolution of how he comes to do this. So I wanted to show you this now to know like what we're prepping for in the years between 2014 and 2017. So here's what James Lindsay sounds like today.
All right, so a lot to unpack. So
lots.
I want to go into critical theory and what this is. I also want to touch on the cynical nature, because, a lot of people around Marx said that he is so cynical, and actually most of what he did was just criticizing.
That's right, ruthless criticism of everything that exists. That's a Marx quote.
Ties directly into this. I want to talk to you about that, but let's start off first with what critical theory is.
So critical theory actually is a reinvention of Marx's ideas. Marx had his ideas. They attempted revolutions in the early 20th century. One of those succeeded, the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia. None of the others succeeded all throughout Europe. In particular, the Hungarian Revolution took and failed. Georg Lukács was kind of in charge of that. And then you had this entity called the Frankfurt School, or the Institute for Social Research. It was founded by Lukács and a handful of other guys in Frankfurt, Germany.
Frankfurt School, of course.
One of whom was Max Horkheimer. And Max Horkheimer was the first person to lay out what critical theory is. And what he meant is that it's Marx's critique applied to everything, ruthlessly. And the idea was to actually analyze the cultural and psychological elements, so you can read people's minds cynically, to try to figure out why Marx's predicted revolutions weren't happening in industrial nations like Britain and Germany and the United States, but only took in a peasant society like Russia. And so the simplest summary of a critical theory, as Horkheimer laid it out in 1937 in a very famous essay that he wrote that year, is that it has to have three components. One is that it has to have a normative vision for society, an endpoint, a goal for society, which they saw as being somehow generally communist, but not specifically Marxist. So it's neo-Marxist is how it's been labeled by history. It has to have a normative vision. It has to be able to identify how the society and its systems, so it's systemic thinking, fail that normative vision, or fail to have what it takes to bring about that normative vision. And then it has to inspire what Marx called praxis, which is the fusion of putting theory into practice. And so it's theoretical driven activism. So it has to inspire social activism on behalf of bringing about that normative vision, which again for the neo-Marxists meant something like communism, but not exactly the way Marx laid it out, say in Capital or the Communist Manifesto.
Your thoughts, Jack?
Well, firstly, Marx doesn't lay out communism in the Communist Manifesto or Das Kapital. So I don't know if he's read those books, but if he has, he's misremembering them. Secondly, so what? I mean, what does any of that have to do with the modern practice in the American Academy of studying gender and systemic gender and race oppression?
It's just all he's doing is he's throwing in these buzzwords. He's using the word cynical, like in the previous bit that I didn't air for you. He's talking about how like there were critical theories, but now he calls them cynical theories because they're just about criticizing everything that's there instead of trying to build something up, and always looking at history through the cynical lens, and that it's all about power relations and not about ideas, et cetera, et cetera. But it's always, he's just kind of throwing in things. Like you notice that he throws in the word like systemic, because like his right-wing audience has heard people talk about things like systemic racism. And so if he can throw in the word, well, these guys, the Frankfurt School, and he's rubbing his hands together at the time, right? They're talking about systemic problems. And so now when we talk about systemic problems, it's all the same thing. It's all the same fundamental error, and it's all coming for you. It's coming for you as a responsible conservative right-wing person who just wants to live their lives. That's the ultimate thing that he's not saying in so many words, but he's definitely implying through all of the work that you're going to hear, through everything that he does currently. That's exactly kind of like the implication that's always left unsaid, is that this is something that's coming for you, that they are coming for your the value that you have produced, the things that you own, the things that you love, your family. Your way of life is under attack by the cynical theorist, by the critical race theorist, because all they know how to do is destroy. And because they lack a epistemic status, an epistemic reality that is built in science and built on reason, it's built on this like postmodernist crap, in his words, it's fundamentally going to always fail. That's the argument that he's essentially making there.
You're absolutely right, and really all I can do is pick holes in his account of the Frankfurt School and its relationship to modern scholarship. But Look, it's the genetic fallacy. Yeah, the Frankfurt School has been incredibly influential in the social sciences. By the way, what the hell is? I mean, that's accurate. There's a Marx quote where he says, I think it's in reference to his method, which is historical materialism, ruthless criticism of all that exists. Yeah, that's the scientific method. That is the basic scientific method. You interrogate reality using the tools you have as best you can. How you get from, Marx thought we should use the scientific method to criticize everything, i.e., interrogate, try to understand everything that we encounter, to postmodernism rejecting the idea of an objective reality, which is an incredible vulgar oversimplification of, again, huge side topic. I'm not going to get into it, but the idea that postmodern theorists like Foucault and so on, they doubted the existence of objective reality outside their heads. I'm very critical of post-structuralism and et cetera. They didn't think the real world didn't exist. Okay. They didn't think there was no such thing as objective reality, but that doesn't even connect. He's talking about Marx's method, historical materialism, as the ruthless criticism of all that exists, and somehow relating that as being the same thing as a political movement that not only, I would say that Foucault, for instance, is a profoundly anti-Marxist thinker. That's why these theories were very fashionable. One of the reasons in the 90s, because they were a reaction against the radical intellectual ideas of the 1960s, which were perceived as having failed. Again, huge side topic, not going to get drawn into it. But, it's inherently incoherent. You can't go from Marx's method of severe criticism to this fictional idea of postmodernism as just based upon a rejection of external reality. And again, what I was saying before, the genetic fallacy. Yeah, Frankfurt School, more complicated than he's depicting it, but it's true. Very influential. Adorno, Horkheimer, Marcuse, Fromm, etc. Very influential. But you can't claim that because these thinkers, who to a greater or lesser extent had as their project the replacement of capitalist society by some form of communist society, and again, that's debatable. You can't claim that because they've been influential, that therefore necessarily modern theories which draw on them aim at the exact same goals. That is so incredibly childish. And it's just not how ideas work. It's not how scholarship works. It's not how academia works. It's not how academic fashion works. It's not how anything works. But it's being done, as you said, to imply, hint, hint, using intellectual sounding words, basically a conspiracy theory. It's basically the cultural Marxism conspiracy theory.
Yeah, he literally talks about the Frankfurt School.
Yeah,
yeah. This is.
But one more thing, right?
Yeah, go ahead.
Cultural Marxism conspiracy theory. They always tie it back to Gramsci. The supposed march through the institutions. He didn't say that, but Gramsci used the phrase critical theory in his notebooks. He used it to mean Marxism. I'm surprised none of them have gotten hold of this, actually, or maybe they have. But you know why he did that in his prison notebooks? Because he was in prison. He was in the fascist prisons of Mussolini, and they read what he wrote, and he had to use code.
Understand. So here's what if James Lindsay or one of his fans or 100,000 of his fans, because he has over 200,000 Twitter followers. So, I'm sure we're going to get some Lindsay fans deciding to get angry at us at this. And so let's have this off of the past out. If they were to listen to this and criticize us, they'd say, well, yeah, but you guys, whenever you talk about like racism in modern American society, you go back to slavery, you go back to the beginning of policing and the beginning of the prison system and talk about these things as if all that's connected. And what does a person who was never a slave have to say about?
But it's empirically connected, and that's what these disciplines are to a greater or lesser extent. Showing that's the research program to a greater or lesser extent. Exactly. That's the point.
And you use the critical theories, you use these theories in order to kind of develop hypotheses, which are then judged based on their empirical support. Like we have direct empirical support, direct empirical data, like material understanding of how the Civil War impacted Jim Crow, impacted the civil rights era, which impacted redlining and all those things, which lead to African-American people being over-policed and having no household wealth, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All the things that, we could bring up here. It's not just like, well, we just looked through the rose-colored glasses and saw a butterfly, and the butterfly said black people are oppressed, even though Barack Obama is president of the United States. That's not how it works. There's like endless amounts of like actual research, actual people talking very seriously about these things and arguing with each other that leads to like these kinds of conclusions. And nothing.
You guys, you Lindsay fans, you're the creationists in this scenario. You're the ones denying the mountains of evidence. You are the postmodernists that only live in your own heads, denying the existence of objective reality, because you don't feel like slavery should have any sort of influence on the modern world and how African Americans live today, because you don't like that idea. You assume it's wrong, and therefore you assume that people that adduce the empirical evidence proving that it's right are up to shenanigans. You are literally, as always, that they're doing what they accuse you of doing.
Always. So, moving forward.
By the way, I like the reference to psychology as reading people's minds. That's just the entire discipline of psychology, psychiatry, psychotherapy, everything that involves evaluating anybody else's mental state, just equated with clairvoyance.
Well, he's saying that like the claims of like implicit racism or the claims of structural racism are like reading racism into people's behavior based on nothing, and that's like reading people's minds as opposed to making inferences based on clearly observable behavior. And so, again, all this stuff, it's all like code words that his right-wing audience is going to pick up on.
Yeah.
That he's like dropping in almost as non sequiturs. So we're gonna move forward by moving back. And so I'm going to take you back to 2014. And we're going to spend a lot of time with this atheistically speaking Serious Inquiries Only podcast today, because he did so many appearances, and it's this like treasure trove of data, of information that I found just a couple of weeks ago. And I just clarify one thing. This isn't his show. This is a show he appeared on. No, this is a show he appeared on several times. This is actually a show from this guy, Tom Smith, who we're going to play some old clips in which Smith, not the greatest guy. He does not come across all that great in some of these from 2014. I don't think he's a leftist, by the way. I would consider. I think he's kind of progressive liberal, but he is very much kind of on board with the broader, kind of project of trying to combat these guys. And as you will hear, he has no love lost for Lindsay by 2017. And his most recent episode was calling out Brett Weinstein for his Weinstein and Heying for their vaccine denial bullshit. So he has definitely gotten better over the years. But this is Tom Smith's podcast. I dip in and out of this. Aina Mohammed, who has been a guest on this show, and we've guested on his show fairly recently. He seems like a decent enough guy. Tom, please reach out to me. I would love to have a chat with you at some point about some of this, and maybe come on the show. So this is not James Lindsay's show. This is not James Lindsay's thing. He regularly guested on this show, and that's why we're playing a lot from this. We're playing from his appearances to understand how James Lindsay got to where he is today. So this first clip requires a little bit of setup, and I was not expecting this name to come up because his current partner in crime is Peter Boghossian. I wasn't expecting Peter Boghossian to show up so early in my understanding of James Lindsay, but in his very first appearance on this Atheistically Speaking podcast, it's about a tweet by Peter Boghossian.
Okay.
This tweet has since been deleted.
Oh, my favorite kind.
Yeah. It is on the Internet Archive. It is linked in the show notes. I am now going to read this tweet. This is from October 30th, 2014. I've never understood how someone can be proud of being gay. How can one be proud of something one didn't work for?
That is so fucking stupid. I don't even.
It is the ultimate. It is like the stupidest. Like in 2014 is not 2021. It was 7 years ago. It might as well be the Neolithic age, right? But everybody understands what gay pride means.
That's your grandpa suddenly blurting it out, Well, I don't understand why they're proud of it. They say they're born that way. How can you be proud of it if you're born that way? Yes, Grandpa. Go back to sleep.
There are people in the mentions, even in this archive link, saying what pride is, and we're gonna spend a little bit of time on this because Lindsay and Smith certainly did. So let's just play. Once you've done that tweet, understand that I'm clipping a couple of minutes out of an hour-long podcast. Actually, I think this is a 2-part podcast, so 2 hours of these two men talking about it, in which Smith is basically saying, like, look, he has the right idea. He knows why people say this, but is willing to sort of like have the conversation about, well, maybe it shouldn't be used that way, or maybe this is like kind of a thing. This kind of like debate bro or like conversation bro. Anyway, this is a very powerful clip if you want to understand who James Lindsay was in 2014 and how he always was the douchebag that people are pretending he only is today. So here, 2014, proud to say you're gay. And this is all about this particular tweet. So, and oh, by the way, he refers to Pete here at the beginning of the clip. He calls Peter Boghossian, he calls him Pete. He calls him by his first name. So just to be clear.
He is a totally genuine guy. I've gotten to know him a little bit in the last year, and he walks what he talks. He is a completely genuine guy. He is ready to have a honest conversation that is an honest conversation with anybody who wants to have one.
The only thing that's important in this honest conversations. Yep.
But, he has some stipulations that the conversation isn't, so reactionary, that there's an openness on both sides, etc.
Well, I can really relate to that. That's what I like to do. And I think that the response, between Greta and Chris Stedman was another one I saw, was mainly like, look, idiot, it's pretty obvious. We're proud to be out as gay in a society that's, sort of hostile to that. That seemed to be the response. Now, you already addressed that maybe he was, he's not really talking about that. He's saying it shouldn't, the phrase maybe should be different, should be proud to be out or proud to, not just proud to be gay. And
proud to say that you're gay. I mean, it's one syllable really. So, let me mention, Greta's thing, I tried to read it. I couldn't. I made it a few sentences in. I skipped further down.
All right. So I'm just going to pause it right there. He's talking about Greta Christina, who was very active in atheist circles around this time. Someone that I have enormous respect for. I believe she's still kind of like on Facebook. I think she's kind of stepped out of the limelight to some degree, but she was well known to be a queer woman living in San Francisco who had literally come out in the 60s, who had experienced enormous amounts of personal and political violence against herself and her body, and who was beloved among movement atheists who were not reactionary dipshits. She is a person that I've had enormous respect for over the years.
Yeah. All that, yeah. But it's only one syllable, Daniel.
Actually, I love that he's saying, instead of saying gay pride, you should say, I'm proud to be gay, which is more than one syllable.
It's not,
it's more it's one syllable basically, which means it's not one syllable. And also, do you not understand how political slogans work? It's just like this, put a pick in the side of my skull and just slowly pound it in. It's what listening to these people talk about this for 2 hours.
But you see, prioritizing listening to the lived experiences of queer people or African Americans or whatever in these sorts of studies, these sorts of critical studies, that's basically exactly the same as saying that Western science is just a completely artificial and subjective framework of knowing that's limited to white guys and is therefore inherently bad, and that you should privilege the experience of people who are on an oppression pyramid. Just admitting that she might have a more informed, richer perspective on how it feels to be gay in a homophobic society. No, that's basically denying the existence of objective reality for identitarian reasons. Oh, fuck off!
Well, Now you get to listen to the rest of James Lindsay's comment here, in which he describes the fact that he was not able to even read Greta Christina's blog post talking about this issue, and his reasons why. And so you note that he calls out Bogosian for being he's a really straightforward guy. He's a great person. He can have any conversation out there. He can stay polite and be nice and all this sort of thing. Actually, he's actually very, very bad at that. And in fact, he's we will eventually talk much more about Peter Bogosian, but that's the claim. And as opposed to the terrible Greta Christina, which we will now finish this, and then to wash the voice out of our head, I will read a section from Greta Christina's blog post, which James Lindsay was completely unable to read.
It better not be too long, because my attention might wander, because I'm a very honest guy and I'm only interested in serious conversations.
I read a couple more sentences. I realized, to my rather astounding surprise, that she was basically saying the same thing that Bogosian had said, but somehow had managed to get so consumed with some kind of a self-righteous wrath or dyspeptic vituperation or something, words like that fit. So I just quit reading it. I can't read that. It's not discussion. The only thing I remember standing out from it is seeing that she wanted to tell Pete what gay people have to be proud of. And what it was that she said is exactly what he said they should be proud of, that they have faced adversity and overcome it, that they can own who they are, and despite the adversity, and that they're proud to say that they're gay. That's exactly what Pete said that he understands to be the use of the word. So I'm not quite sure what was going on,
Well, let me ask, where did he say that exactly? Because obviously the first post was really short. Was it in comments or?
So I didn't.
So Bogosian, if it's true that Bogosian did say all that, then he basically answered his own question and left the deliberately provocateurish original question standing. And Lindsay's problem is what exactly? So this woman dared to be angry about the provocation.
So let me be clear about this.
His super rational genius brain just couldn't handle all these feels that were coming at him from this woman.
Smith asked the right question. So where exactly did Bogosian say this? And Lindsay, it sounds like I am quoting that I am not giving Lindsay's answer here. The truth is he fumbles around, never really gives a real answer to that question. I could play a long clip that would demonstrate that to your effect. I'm just going to tell you, if you want to go listen to episode 83 of the podcast of Atheistically Speaking, you can listen to the whole thing yourself and come to your own conclusion. I really am trying to give enough context so that I cannot be accused of taking this man out of context. I am not playing 5 minutes of this clip, 5 more minutes of this clip just to prove that fact. I have given you ample sources so you can go look for yourself. So that's where I land on this. I did quite a bit of looking for this. I cannot find where Bogosian said anything of the sort in the context of this. Lindsay does not claim that. Lindsay claims in a blog post that he wrote that from what Bogosian has said to him privately, that Bogosian believes that and understands that, right?
Oh, right.
I cannot find a public pronouncement where Bogosian says that. Now, I believe that Bogosian is not like bigoted against gay people in the way that, plenty of the other people we've covered on this podcast are bigoted against gay people. I think he's a very nice kind of liberal guy who's just asking questions, who's just doing the thing. We will cover Bogosian in much more detail in a future episode. I think it's time now to read a little segment from the blog post that James Lindsay just couldn't get through. He read a few sentences. It's not a conversation. And I think if you got this far, you deserve a little bit of this happening.
Well, it's all that dyspeptic vituperation. Which sounds fucking great, to be honest. Bring it on.
Yeah, no. This is a segment from this. And again, this is linked. I've linked this in the show notes. This has not been taken down. You don't even need an archive.org link for this. So here's Greta Christina. Okay, fine. As a fully licensed and registered LGBT person, I will spell out to Peter Boghossian what exactly gay pride means. Actually, to be precise, I will point out what LGBT pride means. LGBT pride does not mean being proud of having been born lesbian, gay, bisexual, or trans. It means being proud of having survived. It means being proud of living in a homophobic, biphobic, transphobic society, a society that commonly treats us with contempt at best and violent hatred at worst, and still getting on with our lives. It means being proud of flourishing in a society that commonly thinks we're broken. It means being proud of being happy in a society that commonly thinks we should be miserable. It means being proud of being good and compassionate in a society that commonly thinks we're wicked. It means being proud of fighting for our rights and the rights of others like us in a society that commonly thinks we should lie down and let ourselves get walked on, or that thinks we should be grateful for crumbs and not ask for more. It means being proud of retaining our dignity in a society that commonly treats us as laughingstocks. It means being proud of loving our sexuality and our bodies in a society that commonly thinks our sexuality and our bodies are disgusting. It means being proud of staying alive in a society that commonly beats us down and wants us dead. Fuck you, James Lindsay and Peter Boghossian. Yeah.
Yeah, and the shaming of her for, I didn't hear any particular, maybe she was vituperative elsewhere, but I didn't hear anything that sounded remotely unhinged or unreasonable or insulting in there. The shaming of her for using passionate language in response to what is definitely a provocation and an insult, that illustrates her point.
Exactly. And the point is that she doesn't take Peter Boghossian and the other little bigoted fuckheads by the hand and say, I'm sorry that you feel like you can't say straight pride and not be talked down to by us who are actually dealing with actual repression. I'm sorry that you feel insulted by the way that I use the words to express my identity. I'm sorry, and I need to learn to communicate better to you because I am the person who is actually in the wrong here if I make your fifis hurt. That's what Lindsay is saying, and that's what Boghossian is saying, and that's what all of these fucking, I know we're talking about this thing from 2014, but everything that Lindsay is doing now, the attitudes that lead him to saying and doing the things he's doing now are absolutely fully present in that exchange in 2014. Full on.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I'm sorry that there's me living with rampant, savage homophobia for decades that, constantly disadvantages me and oppresses me and insults me and tells me that I'm wrong for even existing, when really I should have been worried about you sitting there being irritated by your inability to understand why gay people say they're proud. I should have been more considerate of your slight irritation at that phrase. Why did we have the nerve to march through the streets saying that thing that doesn't immediately make sense to you? I'm so sorry.
I mean, I think your penis, your conceptual penis, just was slightly shriveled by me being slightly angry. And there's also a lesson to be learned. For me, I mean, I was not always perfectly on the right side of these issues, and I don't, and if you talk to me back in the 2000s, I was kind of maybe, maybe can we kind of change the language a little bit? And people definitely got up in my face and got upset with me for not being right on that. And you know what I did? I said, maybe these people who are really upset, maybe there's a reason they're upset, and maybe I need to Google something or Alta Vista something back in the night, maybe I need to go and do a little bit of research on my own. And it turns out that when you do the research, you can find people who describe their experiences and who make these arguments for themselves. And if you put a little bit of work into it, you can at least empathize, wow, what a thought.
I know.
So what we've demonstrated, I apologize that we spent a little bit of time there kind of going through that, but there are certain people that James Lindsay is clearly does not think are worthy of his empathy. And Greta Christina, because of her upsetness at Boghossian's tweet and about centuries of homophobia, etc., that she's living through every day, this is not a person who is worthy of his respect because she typed in language that he thought was upsetting.
Yeah, he thought was too emotional. And, Peter Boghossian is entitled to the assumption of good intentions and good faith and reasonableness, etc. I don't know what it is about him that makes him entitled to that assumption, but apparently he is.
Yeah, well,
actually, I know precisely what it is about him that makes him entitled to that assumption, in his opinion, anyway.
Well, it will shock you to learn that there is another group of people who are also much more worthy of having their feelings considered, according to James Lindsay. In a book that he wrote after this exchange, I believe in 2015, this book was called Everybody is Wrong About God. And he did a 2-part podcast appearance, again, on Atheistically Speaking. This is episodes 191 and 192, linked in the show notes. I am not playing clips from that. Believe me, it's completely off topic of this podcast, and there's very little there. There's stuff that like you and I could like talk about, and there's some interesting stuff there in terms of, like the belief in the afterlife and how you kind of interact with that, and et cetera, et cetera. More to the point, I'm going to read from a review of this book by David Chivers in The Humanist. This is Lindsay's thesis, and I think it tells you a lot, again, about Lindsay's perspective on things. Given that Lindsay feels most people don't intellectually believe in God anymore, his next main inquiry is an exploration of what people do mean when they say they believe in God. He argues that most of these people are actually articulating a more subtle need for community, comfort, and a set of morals, which they then equate with God. God is the embodiment of their ideas on what makes a good life. But once personified, they confuse their ideas of what makes for a good life with the actual individual that they have created, and then stubbornly argue for the existence of said character, i.e. God. Lindsay calls on atheists. Yeah,
secondhand Daniel Dennett, basically.
Yeah, this is
which is already secondhand Feuerbach. Never mind.
Right. Yeah. No. This is not. This is. There's nothing original in this. Like this was listening to these episodes. I'm very much like, and people wonder why the new atheists were so marginalized and fucking hated in the 2000s, because like this is what you think you're going to spend like hours and hours of your life talking about. It's like, well, no, they actually believe in this thing that they call God, and like it's just so disconnected from anything real. Finishing this quote that I've got here. Lindsay calls on atheists to recognize this phenomenon and change their arguments accordingly, addressing the needs that God personifies for that person rather than the actual belief in God. This is the next step of post-theism. Society must find ways to fulfill those needs in a secular way. Once those needs are addressed and met in those other ways, the need for God will quickly and naturally fall away.
Gee, that sounds strangely familiar.
It's almost as if living in Middle Tennessee, as they call it, and being surrounded by religious conservatives means that the people that he is most that he thinks actually deserve a certain level of respect for their beliefs, even if he doesn't agree with them, are the right-wing reactionary conservative dipshits who are trying to get creationism pushed in schools and would burn Greta Christina alive given the political opportunity to do so.
Yeah,
those people deserve respect and deserve the hand-holding. Those are the people that he can have a conversation with and that deserve respect. Not Greta Christina, because she typed in all caps that one time.
Well, she was vituperative and dyspeptic. Yeah. No, that's interesting, because it did. I mean, for a moment there, it reminded me of that famous passage from Marx about religion. The passage where he talks about the opium. Everybody's heard it, the opium of the people, but then goes on to say about how religion is the soul of soulless conditions, and the expression. Basically, what he's saying is that it's the expression of alienation, and it's both, a complaint against alienation and a plea for changing the world so that it's different. And the idea, I mean, it's very, it's nowhere near as sophisticated as Marx's analysis. But what he's saying basically is that religion is some form of expression of discontent. And, if we want to address religion as a social problem, we need to address the underlying discontent or the underlying problems that lead people to that source of comfort. Except that he's doing it from the right, isn't he?
Well, and what are the material things that you need to consider in terms of like a bunch of reactionary Christians in Tennessee? Like, what are their problems? Their problems are like the existence of gay people and like black people and welfare.
That's right. Yeah.
cheats and all that. So like that's their problem, you know?
Yeah.
That's the thing that's the thing that we need to like reach out to them on and make common cause with these people. It's just so like, it's such a recurring theme that we kind of come across in this podcast is, you know, when you want to understand who people are and what they really believe, ask who they extend empathy to, who they extend sympathy to, and who they don't, right?
Yeah.
And it's always with these people, like when you find someone who's, I just want to ask questions about, you know, whether we should use gay pride, whether that's a reasonable thing to say. It's to protect the feelings of right-wing dipshits. Yeah. And then when you reach out to the right-wing dipshits, it's like, no, you queer people just need to be quiet just a little bit longer, because we're just trying to get the right-wing dipshits like 1% closer to our side. No, they're not gonna do anything bad. Donald Trump, that's just some guy on the television. It's fine. It's fine. You know, like the rise of the alt-right is like clearly like 2 years from now, guys. Like we don't have to worry about it. We don't have to worry about it. There's no white nationalism. It's not going to happen. Yeah, not going to be a thing. I'm being sarcastic. Anyway, we should probably move forward, right?
And even if it does happen, you know, it's the expression of legitimate concerns, and your concerns aren't legitimate, but theirs are.
James Lindsay does the thing today of whenever any kind of like these kind of like far right people, the white nationalists, Nazis, KKK, etc., is kind of brought up to him. His response is like, "Well, that's just like the fringe of the fringe. That's this tiny minority that has no
Sam
power
Harris
in
maneuver,
society." Yeah, it's the standard. It's the thing that all of these like IDW dipshits always do whenever you bring that up. It's like, well, yeah, but they don't have any power. I mean, you got to really talk. It's these college kids, the woke college kids. They're the ones that are. They're the problem. So moving forward here, and I'm just going to say
what really underlies the project to attack things like critical race theory. And this is not the place to, you know, examine what critical race theory even is, or its flaws or strengths or anything like that. We're not going to do that here. But this is the underlying meaning of the project. You deny the existence of these systemic problems so that you can eternally give aid and comfort to the reactionary sectors of society.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the point, is like CRT and like Lindsay's like current usage in the kind of larger political means is not critical race theory, a set of ideas within kind of legal institutions and you know, academic institutions that are designed to describe how society works. It's not an interpretive lens that you can apply to things. It is any consideration of systemic problems needing to have systemic solutions at all. Like exactly. Like any examination of that in any context is fundamentally verboten, because it's part of the snarl word CRT, critical race theory. That's the thing that he's on these days.
Yeah, absolutely. It bears no relation to actual academic practice or content. There's a very good article, which I might link to, which goes into his description of CRT. He doesn't know the first thing about it. He gets everything wrong. His arguments are spurious. The people he cites are the wrong people. You know, they're not CRT people, etc., etc.
Is this the Sam Hoadley Brill?
It is. Yes, I was desperately trying to remember the name. Yeah, because it's a bit of a complex name for me just at the moment to remember.
I follow both. I follow both Sam Hoadley Brill and Sam Alder Bell on Twitter.
But yeah, when this guy talks about CRT, he's not talking about an actual field of study which has strengths and weaknesses, etc. You know, it's a moral panic. It's a boogeyman. And the aim is, as you say, to blacken the name of any sort of collective or systemic opposition and remedy to systemic oppressions.
Yeah. And people within CRT, people within critical theory broadly, argue with each other all the time. That's what all this academic publishing is about, is people publishing and then having debates. So speaking of debates.
Yes, let's crash on. I'm doing a better job of derailing you than I thought I'd be capable of, actually.
You're doing great. You're doing great. I think this is fun, but this gets so much worse.
Let's go.
So I'm just gonna highlight here just the next clip that I'm gonna play uses the word rape about 35 times. So content warning. This is not because we are describing a rape or doing anything like getting into any kind of details about rape. This is about the teaching of rape law in first-year law school classes. And
oh yeah,
so this was a thing that kind of for like a month or two in 2015 became this kind of giant, like the Daily Mail published pieces about this. You got tons of it became like this right-wing shitstorm, right? And anyway, we'll get into this briefly here, but this is part of a 3-part episode on this Atheistically Speaking podcast, in which James Lindsay and this guy Eli Bosnick, who is a comedian, he has his own kind of podcasts. He is a regular guest on Atheistically Speaking, and he now on Serious Inquiries Only. When he found out this afternoon that I was going to be doing an episode about James Lindsay, or like somebody tweeted it at him, and he said, "Hey, don't forget the 3 episodes that we did." And I'm like, "Oh, don't worry, I listened to Eli." So Eli, if you're listening, this is about 4.5 fucking hours of debate between this guy Eli Bosnick and James Lindsay. Eli Bosnick is unfailingly polite to this man. I really regret not using more audio from this, but I just have so much more stuff to do. It's, as these kinds of debates always are, it is incredibly frustrating because Eli is so polite and spends so much of his time trying to extract the real, any kind of real value in trying to treat James Lindsay as a good faith actor. And James Lindsay is just shitting on everything imaginable during this entire process.
Yeah.
4.5 hours. I'm going to play you about 2 minutes of this, but it gives you a sense of how this goes. And this is from the 3rd part. And this is an entire episode, an entire hour and 15 minutes or so about trigger warnings. This is how it starts.
Oh, dear God.
Yeah. And yes. And again, this clip, it uses the word rape a lot. So again, if that's something, I'm just highlighting that now. It just does by definition.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I do know what they are. I was familiar with the concept going into it, but I decided this was a topic I actually needed to look up to know more about if I was going to talk to you about it, because I'm not familiar with the relevant literature.
What a shock.
And so, like I said, I wanted to bring up in particular, I mentioned the problem with law education, and I mentioned the paper by Kim Champanen. I'm saying her name wrong. I know I'm saying it wrong. I'm having a hard time with that name. But it's called Crisis and Trigger Warnings, Reflections on Legal Education and the Social Value of Law. It was published in Chicago Kent Law Review 2015. Now, I want to bring this up particularly because she's pointing at a particular problem, and her solution is actually trigger warnings. So it's contrary to my point of view. There are other law professors, Jenny Suk, like I mentioned, Alan Dershowitz at Harvard, Eugene Volokh at UCLA, that all bring up the same problem. And this, I know, is something you're a little bit familiar with, Eli, that rape law, you actually now, I know you said at some point that if you knew that there were professors that were shying away from teaching rape law in first-year criminal law, and it was documented, then you would recognize that as a major problem. And that is exactly what these papers document, is that this is actually happening. And Chambanpin is say it really slowly if I'm not mispronouncing it. Her paper specifically cites, let's use trigger warnings if it means we can keep teaching rape law. The problem has gotten so significant because obviously if they stop teaching rape law adequately, then you're going to have underprepared legal representation for people who have been raped. So you need people to learn rape law, and social justice, of course, wants rape law thoroughly covered.
Is social justice an entity?
And it is these, what do they call them, edge cases or whatever, there's a specific name for them, that are the controversial ones, and they are upsetting to people. And so she specifically acknowledges that maybe trigger warnings are the way, but let's not lose rape law, because right now what's happening is rape law is people are staying out of it. They're not covering the kinds of cases that need to get covered, and so on and so forth. So
can you explain that to me? Because I'm confused. Why are trigger warnings making people not cover rape law?
No. Trigger warnings are not. Complaints from students that it's causing them to be triggered and upset. And then they complain to their so you have compassionate professors typically, and you have a very compassionate and willing to listen administration typically.
I included that last bit just because the idea that like administration in law schools and even in universities is deeply sympathetic to students complaining of
it's just bending over backwards, like, no doubt.
No, this is just fucking not the case. It just isn't. Like it's a laughable, you know. And again, even in undergraduate, you know, like there is no sympathy given by administrations to, except in like a handful of like, very high, high tuition, small liberal arts colleges. You get an occasional, like something that then gets put on the, the right wing ledger of, horrible incidents that happen on like college campuses, et cetera, et cetera. He spends a lot of time talking about victim culture and about like the culture of victimization and all the stuff that you would expect from something that's talking about trigger warnings for an hour in 2015. It's all there.
Meanwhile, the planet is fucking burning.
Yes. And meanwhile, Richard Spencer is at this point getting on television occasionally. He is he's out there. He's organizing. The alt-right is becoming a thing. Gamergate is in full swing at this point. No, we got to talk about trigger warnings.
Yeah,
it's a terrible thing. It's a terrible thing. You notice also that he kind of like, oh no, this isn't caused by trigger warnings. It's sort of like he sort of like shifts around whenever he's challenged on like, what does trigger warnings have to do with any of this, right?
Well, this is it. I left that quote. I mean, I don't know if any of this is even true, right? Because there's a very good recent episode of You're Wrong About where Michael Hobbs he's doing a series on political
cancel
correctness
culture,
and cancel culture, and the first part of the series is about the political correctness panic from the 90s, and it's really good because he just shows that the whole thing was based on anecdote and 99 times out of 100 when you go and examine the actual facts of the case, what you've got is absolutely a nothing burger. It's been misreported by a credulous press, and the stakes are incredibly low. And this just sounds, like so much now with cancel culture and wokeness, again, moral panic. It's just a reiteration of the political correctness, moral panic from the 90s. So this sounds like that. But even if this is all true, I was left with just this feeling of like, where's the problem again? Like, law students are finding themselves triggered by mention of rape in classes. So, okay, well, that's a problem. So what do? We give them warnings that the topic is about to come up. So
the logic that he's going for, and I apologize if the clip didn't really make it clear, what he's saying is that students are now complaining enough about the way that these classes are taught that professors are not teaching these classes, and therefore the next generation of like social workers and people doing work in these fields will not have an adequate grounding in rape law.
So are these professors not worried about the fact that these students are going to fail that portion of their exams? Is this can't actually be a thing? I don't believe this is a thing.
It's not.
But apart from anything else, if they're doing that, if they're cancelling their courses because of this, then they're behaving like whiny, panicky piss babies who are failing out of sheer oversensitivity to students daring to complain to actually do their job and educate their students. That's the problem here. The problem isn't students complaining. What the fuck do you expect students to do? We want students to complain and question. It's where you learn how to think. College, at least that's the idea. The job of professors is to be the grown-ups in the room and to say, yeah, I know it's distressing, but you do have to learn about this, and to a certain extent, take the feelings of students into consideration as well. It's not unreasonable to say, don't just spring the subject of rape on me, because apart from anything else, college campuses, my God. It reminds me deeply of an example that Michael Hobbs goes into in that podcast we were just talking about.
Don't worry. I'm about to blow your mind, and that is that nothing James Lindsay said in that was true.
No. But even in that one case I'm talking about that Michael Hobbs talks about, that it reminded me of, what it turns out to be is a professor cancelling his course because he has a complete hissy fit overreaction to the fact that one student asked him politely, didn't even ask him to do anything, just told him politely that I find aspects of your course troubling.
Yeah, exactly.
So if it's even happening at all, it's just that all over again. But you're about to tell me it didn't even happen, I bet.
Well, it's not. It's so first of all, he quotes this is Inception level wrongness that we're about to get into here, right? Which I picked this clip because I thought it was interesting that you start to see in this exchange where he's like dropping these references all the time. So he drops these names of papers, these authors of papers. He drops this kind of thing and says, well, it concludes this, it concludes that, and we have to look at the real study. And in a live debate, if you're just presented with this, there's no way you're going to be able to go and look at this. And this is how you just sort of like bamboozle your opponents. It's not even like a Gish Gallop. It's just I am pretending to have this air of authority by, dropping all these papers. And then like kind of later on, when you go and look it up and go like, well, I would love to see your sources on that. Trust me, we're about to get into like how egregiously he is using sources at this point. But
and again, this is a persistent James Lindsay thing.
Oh, no.
Sources that turn out to be bullshit.
Again, we are demonstrating that in 2015 he was doing the same things he's doing in 2021 at this point.
Gotcha.
That is the point here. Okay.
Yeah. The James Lindsay has been excreting his squid ink for a very long time.
So for the first thing, he refused to learn how to pronounce the last name of the scholar Chambonpin. Now, I'm not sure I'm pronouncing it correctly either, but at least I tried. I Googled the name. It is a Philippine name. I found the paper that he's referring to because he was nice enough to actually quote the title. And if you Google the title, you can find it. I didn't read the paper, but I have the abstract in the show notes. This is not a paper about trigger warnings. This is a paper talking about faculty in law schools using complaints from students as a way of neglecting the power that they have in their classrooms, and even more importantly, the power that the neoliberal institutions behind them have to affect their. So it's like, I feel threatened that my job will be on the line because these like woke college kids are coming and complaining to me, and that reflects badly on me. And instead of using that as a way of challenging the power above them to fire them for things, they are instead blaming the college kids.
Yeah.
And encourages the law school professors to actually take the side of the college kid, to take the side of their students, to prevent a solid front against the institutions themselves, which are the real bad actors in these situations.
Mm-hmm.
Again, I have not read the full paper. I apologize if I am misquoting it. This paper has nothing to say about like trigger warnings. It just isn't about that. It just isn't about that. I also found a BuzzFeed article by Katie J.M. Baker. This is entitled "Teaching Rape Law in the Age of the Trigger Warning," and let's just read a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
This is a quote from a student who is taking. So in first year law school, you take a kind of a basic course in criminal law. Every person is required to take. It's like a basic required curriculum class. The vast majority of lawyers are never going to practice criminal law. You're going to get into tax law. You're going to get into corporate finance. You're going to do something other than criminal law. Criminal law is a rare specialization. Everybody who teaches law school teaches intro criminal law because it's just a basic required course that everybody has to teach. Some of them teach it very badly. That's the lesson that we learn here, right? And here's the quote. You're in a Harvard Law classroom, which is supposed to be this advanced, high-minded environment. And when we got to rape, the conversation totally devolved into bullshit, one Harvard Law graduate said. I don't need to pay Harvard tuition to hear men be dumbasses. Actually, I think you pay Harvard Law, the professors are kind of dumbasses. Anyway, criminal law is a required class. So even students who want to practice tax law or litigate intellectual property cases must participate in quote unquote rape week. It also means that professors who aren't necessarily experts in the field sometimes teach it. For many students, that's where the problems start. Some hate it when professors insist on using the Socratic method, a common law school teaching practice in which students are cold called and mercilessly questioned because a rape survivor might have to argue an accused rapist's case. Others don't understand why professors engage with students who make insensitive remarks about victims, such as, what if she looked older than 12? Or, is it still rape if it wasn't consensual, but he really thought it was, instead of shutting them down? Some law students even told BuzzFeed News that they chose to skip their rape week classes completely rather than seethe in silence. Isn't that a much more realistic and valid thing than whatever James Lindsay was pretending was happening?
Yeah.
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 And it's also, it's also one that speaks of institutional and widespread, ingrained, one might even say systemic misogyny and sexism.
You just say that because you're a postmodernist critical race theorist.
There you go.
I'm going to this much detail again to demonstrate the truth of the matter here, to demonstrate how much Lindsay is just twisting facts to his own political agenda all the time in every single exchange he has. There is
it's clearly a reflex for the guy.
Yeah. He went and picked out papers that he could then use to make this point, and he doesn't even quote from the papers. He doesn't even quote from the abstracts. He just sort of like summarizes. He lays it all out on this Eli Bosnick guy, and Bosnick is just kind of forced to kind of go, what does this mean? What are you talking about? Like, show me the papers. If you can convince me that this is a real thing, we can have a real conversation about it. Like, Bosnick is at every point treats this guy in good faith. And, the lesson here is don't do that ever again. But
yeah.
All right. Moving on. We're going to talk about the conceptual penis.
At last. What you all came for.
What y'all came for.
Hang on. It's not Hulk Hogan's conceptual penis, is it?
No. I mean, that was a very different kind of conceptual penis, I suppose. So at some point in 2017, Lindsay and Boghossian decided they were going to kind of get together and write a hoax paper. Because all this critical race theory, all this critical theory, gender study stuff, so much bullshit. And they figured, hey, we can get a paper published. We can get a paper published that is equal in quality to that. We can basically get a hoax paper, a fake paper, which is obviously nonsense, get it published in a high peer-reviewed journal, and prove that the whole field is full of nonsense. Spoiler alert, the lessons, the failure of this to succeed in any real way, and the criticism he gets from this ends up becoming the grievance studies hoax. And so that's why we're ending on this. That's why we're covering this one in particular. So they write a paper, The Conceptual Penis as a Social Construct. I have linked to it in the show notes. There's an abstract. I could quote from the conclusion. I put a bunch of text in the show notes. If you want to go read it, I don't want to really spend a whole lot of time on it. But the idea is that what he's doing is he's kind of playing. The idea is they submit the paper to one journal, Norma, which he finds a link to in this real peer review Twitter feed. Like there's a paper from Norma that had something to do with like masculinity studies that he finds. Real peer review is essentially a kind of like, we're going to pull a bunch of like abstracts from, gender studies papers and, that we find ridiculous. And we're going to summarize them badly and then post summaries of it and go look at how crazy these like underwater basket weaving kids are. That's essentially what the real peer review Twitter feed is.
Yeah. He
finds this kind of a paper about masculinity in Norma, kind of quoted from this real peer review, decides we're going to write this thing and we're going to call the conceptual penis, right? And then we're going to fill this paper with a bunch of like kind of nonsense, a bunch of we don't understand the terms that we're using. We're just kind of Googling the terms that we find in other papers and just kind of filling in like a bunch of stuff and then kind of say, and also the conceptual penis is responsible for climate change. Like if you look at the conclusion of this, I mean, basically what the paper is arguing in kind of layman's terms, if you kind of read through all that, it's saying because the penis, the actual physical penis is not always present in every person or every organization that is causing harm to the world. We need to consider if we are going to kind of use this idea of, this kind of like phallic imagery is now I disagree with that kind of thing of like using the phallus that way. This does feel like very like early 90s kind of, post-structuralist theory, second wave feminism stuff. I think that's kind of a useless thing. But it's a metaphor that's used in certain kinds of academia. If you were going to kind of grant this, this kind of idea of the phallus as the kind of symbol of masculinity and the symbol of like raping the world or whatever, then calling it the conceptual penis, and that even people who do not have physical penises can also do this kind of activity, and that using this intellectual construct as a way of understanding these kinds of activities in the world, including climate change. This is a not unreasonable conclusion based on those premises, right? This would fit within a certain realm of study. It is a question. It is a something that is within the realm of conversation for people who are.
It's a rhetorical elaboration on a certain set of conceptual markers.
Right.
Yeah.
It is not nonsense. And I think that's the key here. It's not completely out to lunch. The basic conception of it is. Now, if you throw in a bunch of like spurious references and you throw in a bunch of language that proves that you don't understand the basic thing that you're trying to say, and then your paper does not get published in the journal that you submitted it to, which is what happened here.
Yeah.
And instead you get it published in a pay-to-play journal, which will publish literally anything. And these journals exist in every field. And this is well known to everyone involved in this.
Yeah.
You have proven nothing about anything because you have demonstrated that you do not understand the thing that you're writing. And so your satire, which he defends it when he's forced to defend it, he defends it as satire, which is so effective because it's obvious nonsense, right?
Yeah.
But I could write a paper that would sound to people who don't know mathematics, just like James Lindsay's PhD thesis, very easily. And the fact that it would not be published in a mathematics journal, or if it was, it would be published in a pay-to-play journal that has that if I just pay them to publish it, they will just publish it. That's the exact thing that James Lindsay and Peter Boghossian have done here. And to a great degree, that's also what the grievance studies things are. That gets a little more complicated, so we're going to cover that in a future episode. But this is where we see James Lindsay become the full James Lindsay, right? So they publish this paper, they publish the hoax, they write it up in Skeptic magazine.
Yeah,
Michael Shermer,
Skeptic magazine, edited by Shermer.
Shermer, the very credibly accused rapist, just to be clear.
And former Randian who admits to holding on to several Randian ideas and has written about how capitalism is basically in your genes and other whackdoodle stuff like that.
This is how they describe in the Skeptic magazine piece this kind of conceptual penis hoax. It's assuming the pen names of Jamie Lindsay and Peter Boyle, and writing for the fictitious Southeast Independent Social Research Group, we wrote an absurd paper loosely composed in the style of post-structuralist discoursive gender theory. The paper was ridiculous by intention, essentially arguing that penises shouldn't be thought of as male genital organs, but as damaging social constructions. That's actually not what they argued in the paper, but that's another thing. We made no attempt to find out what post-structuralist discoursive gender theory actually means. Agreed. We assumed that if we were merely clear in our moral implications that maleness is intrinsically bad and that the penis is somehow at the root of it, we could get the paper published in a respectable journal. Again, this is how they characterize their own work in this kind of Skeptic magazine piece. So
it's also a little marker here. Norma is not a prestigious or well-known journal. Norma is not a big deal. Norma turned it down, but Norma isn't a big deal. It's not even close to being a big deal.
When you look into a
journal that's on the outskirts of respectability,
it's not even a critical theory journal. It's not a gender theory journal. It's not there's like a list of gender theory and critical theory journals. Like that group apparently keeps a list of like the top 115 like named journals, like top journals in the field, like in a numbered list of like this one is number 1, this was number 2, et cetera, et cetera. Norma is not on that list.
No,
right?
No, it's not an influential journal, and even they saw through it.
And they saw through it. They rejected it, and apparently they sent on. They said, if you want to get this published, you can go and seek out this pay to play journal. Now there may be some thing going on there where there's some relationship going on. I'd be happy to have like that conversation. This kind of comes up in the things that I'm not going to play in this clip. There is so much detail in this thing. I've got like 15 minutes of audio, not 15, but I've got quite a bit of audio to play you about this because again, it illustrates where James Lindsay is kind of going at this point. So
there are big problems with academic publishing, as Lindsay and Boghossian admit in places and then just completely gloss over.
Right. Well, what you're going to find is what he does is he says, like, we've got what he calls a 2-pronged problem of, we submitted it to one journal, we couldn't get it in, but then we thought, like, well, maybe we can also expose the problems in this kind of pay-to-play, predatory publishing thing. Which
that's a completely different thing.
That is not in anything that is said in the Skeptic article, in the Skeptic magazine piece.
No,
they're talking about how this proves like all the nonsense about, and the fact that it's published is fundamentally a a part of that. Like,
Yeah.
if you just put this on your fucking blog, people might find it a funny joke, but it says nothing about anything.
No, you can't use it as reactionary red meat if you just do that.
It's just you writing up a bunch of nonsense and calling it gender theory. Like, you prove nothing. And so Lindsay goes back on what is now called Serious Inquiries Only with Tom Smith, formerly Atheistically Speaking. And here's where I really had to start. You're going to hear some donks here and there for the Law and Order donk, where I did have to like clip some of this, because they go into rabbit holes. They're finding things. I promise you, I'm taking none of this out of context. I spent a lot of time trying to really trim this down, and even then, it's the rest of these clips will be. I don't think this one actually has a break in it, but all the rest of them do after this one. So just to be clear, again, everything is linked in the show notes. You can go listen, and if I have said anything inaccurately, call me out for it. But I have not. So here we go.
So our hoax doesn't say there's, hey, look at this problem in gender studies. We don't have the data to conclude that. What we do have is another body of evidence, which is look at all these similar papers that are in serious journals. They're not, you just, I mean, for real peer review, I mean, you just said you got this first journal from them, which doesn't has a zero impact score. But they just retweeted the other day yet another one that's from Gender and Society, which is the top ranked.
They've been tweeting a lot of articles, and when I read the abstract, a high percentage of the time they're not even representing what's in the abstract correctly.
They're a satire. They're a satire feed. They're not.
So they're not required. So when they claim, look at this bullshit, they're not required to be honest about it. They can just, and you can cite them as evidence of a problem in gender studies when they're being dishonest.
I'm not citing them as a problem in gender studies. I'm looking at the actual papers themselves.
You just did.
Yep, he did. He did.
There's an entire field out there within this nebula of the social sciences that's called autoethnography, that it reveals a gigantic problem, because it's quite literally taking away as much objectivity as possible and using the most personally subjective avenue to try to create conclusions as possible. It's the exact opposite of removing cognitive biases from fields. It's introducing the maximum cognitive bias into a field, or confirmation bias in particular. This is what I experienced, therefore this is a social problem, and here's how I know, because I tell a story.
You're doing that now. You are literally doing that now.
Yes, he is.
That's autoethnography.
Could you not have been a little more careful in your skeptic article? I don't know who wrote what, but you really were unambiguous. And the fact that everybody got from it, who's publishing this, who's reposting it, who like Dawkins, Shermer, everybody got this is the note from there. Every once in a while, it's necessary and desirable to expose extreme ideologies for what they are. I mean, everybody got from your article that gender studies is the problem. And I don't think it's entirely their fault.
You could tell, one of the reasons I let that play as long as I did is because you can tell that Tom Smith really getting fed up with James Lindsay. This was the part 2, where in the previous episode he had the same guy, Eli Bosnick, who had done the 3-part 4.5-hour debate with Lindsay.
Yeah, I've listened to that one.
Explained in excruciating detail exactly how fucked up all of this was. Linked in the show notes.
That is really good. Go and listen to that episode, because he just demolishes the conceptual penis hoax.
Yeah, he does. It's all you need to know. So after this conversation he has with Lindsay, and at the end of it, as Smith starts to get starts to really kind of dig into some details, Lindsay essentially says, well, look, I've got this is the end of my time. I've really got to get out of here. He also does that in another podcast appearance that he did around this time. Now, I understand he was doing a lot of media around this time, and it's just a thing that happens, but really notable that the second he's like really challenged on any of this in a real way, he bravely runs away. So after the end of the conversation he has with Lindsay, he kind of gets on Lindsay and says, like, look, you quoted a lot of sources to me. You said you had all this stuff that I could look at, and like that proves your point that there is something more systematic kind of going wrong with this. Lindsay apparently does then email him a list of sources with quotes, like descriptions that are presumably taken from the real peer-reviewed Twitter feed. Smith hopes that they are taken from the real peer-reviewed Twitter feed, because if Lindsay himself wrote them and was this dishonest about like the contents of the papers, whether he's sharing them or whether he wrote them, I don't think it much matters. But at this point, this is where Smith is. This is the end of the relationship. At this point, years-long relationship between Tom Smith and James Lindsay, because of Lindsay's just complete fucking dishonesty about this. And so this is where I really had to cut into this.
He's pissing in his face and calling it champagne. The guy got sick of it.
That's exactly what he's doing. Yeah. Let's listen to a bit about James's sources from this list. And if you listen to 44, to SIO 44, you should probably listen to SIO 45, at least the last 25 minutes or so. You can skip the James Lindsay bit, but this thing where he goes through all these papers, it's pretty golden.
He gave me those sources, and guys, I have to say, the email that I received from James with the sources for me to put in the show notes, so this is a public thing, is one of the most disappointing emails I have ever received. It is a list of essentially what I can only guess. I emailed him back, haven't gotten a response. It's what I can only guess is just ripped straight from that real peer review Twitter account, and it's simply straw men and, I think, deliberate misrepresentations of these studies or papers or whatever that's being published. And that is the foundation upon which a lot of people's, including James's, conception of gender studies is. I'm going to go through all of these. I went through and researched all of these. I'm going to tell you about them. I'm going to start in order of importance, because he just gave me a bunch of links to studies and a description of them, which I think, I'm not sure, I hope is taken from real peer review. If these are James's actual descriptions of these, that's horrifying, because they are just terrible. I'm gonna give you some examples. The first one I happened to click on was the worst because it caught my eye. Here's the link he sent me. This is James' exact words. Fat men's penises might not exist, social construction. So yeah, I guess if you see that tweeted, that sounds alarming. Wow, some idiot is writing a paper saying fat men's penises might not exist. Holy crap, that's terrible. Was actually a paper that takes a look at fat male sexuality. It uses those words. Those aren't my words. So it's looking at fat men in movies, pop culture, and it's looking at how their sexuality is portrayed. And it comes to the conclusion that it's either ridiculous, like it's sort of a polluting thing, like fat bastard or whatever in Austin Powers. It's looked at as this gross, polluting kind of thing, or it's ignored, or it doesn't exist. So fat men in media, their sexuality is either ignored or pollutes. And this is the quote that I think the straw man description is based on, because it's the only thing that's even close. Here's a quote from the abstract. Fat male sexuality paradoxically doesn't exist, and in existing pollutes. So that's interesting to me. Does that not seem like a legitimate study? Like if someone wants to say, hey, how are overweight men portrayed in movies sexually? Like what's their sexuality like? Listed all the sources that they went through. There's a bunch of them, the movies and et cetera. And they went through it and said, here's what it looks like. It's either gross in movies, like it's depicted as a disgusting thing, or it's ignored. That's interesting. Is that not legitimate, a legitimate thing to look into? Is that like beneath us as, as scholars? Or, in my opinion, is the horrible straw man description of that, which is fat men's penises might not exist, is that awful straw man beneath scholarship? Because that's my view. Could you truly say that James is the one, James and Peter Boghossian, who are using this to make a determination about a field that they are not in, who are using a straw man parody account, as Eli emphasized a lot? These are the descriptions from that account, or James's descriptions, either or, using that to make a determination about a field they don't have expertise in, is the epitome of anti-intellectual. I
kind of knocked on Tom Smith at the beginning of this episode, so I thought I'd give him a little bit to be righteous, almost as righteous as as Greta Christina was in her blog post in 2014. He's absolutely right there. Like,
I don't really know how. There's nothing to add to that. He's absolutely right. It's outrageous and it's intellectually dishonest.
And this is the thing that James Lindsay is building his entire thing on. Like
Yeah.
when we get to the grievance hoax papers, it's just this over and over and over and over again.
It's just this times
everything,
1,000,
every YouTube appearance, every podcast appearance, everything that James Lindsay does, every time he speaks to lawmakers, every time he influences policy, this is what he's doing. It is this thing. Period.
Yeah. And just, I mean, we're going to talk about the grievance studies hoax properly another time.
Yeah.
I just want to say one thing, because this does infuriate me, and I think it's awful. And I want to express this. This whole thing, like with the conceptual penis hoax and the grievance studies hoax, the entire thing, the basic idea behind all of it is absolutely a violation of the claimed values, because the claimed values are all the lovely liberal values about free expression and free inquiry, the lovely scientific, the idea of science as this completely, it's a troublesome idea. I'm not defending it, but the idea of science is this neutral, objective way of looking at the world. And you arrive at truth through, discussion, open discussion and open inquiry. And you might even call it the ruthless criticism of all that exists. But these are the claimed values that they're claiming to be standing up for, right? And this stuff, this ridiculing of these attempts to dig into these subjects, it's a direct violation of what they're claiming to be championing. It's a direct violation because, if you actually follow those values, then what you say is everything's up for discussion. And how we work out what's worth discussing is by discussing it. We put it out there, we argue about it, and we arrive at as close an approximation of truth as we can by examining each other's ideas, subjecting them to scrutiny, arguing about them. And this entire, the unspoken, implicit claim being made is that some questions, some ideas, some propositions are just not worthy of consideration. They're beneath consideration. And it always seems to be, by pure coincidence, I'm sure, the ideas and the propositions that are about the fact that there is injustice in this world and some people suffer from it more than others. And that is not liberalism. That is, it is liberalism in its worst aspects, but that is a betrayal of the better
of the quote unquote liberal values that Lindsay claims to espouse, or at least at the time claimed to espouse, and other people within the IDW sphere. Exactly. This is now. I actually agree that there are certain ideas that we don't need to be discussing anymore. For instance, should we kill millions of people? Not. I think the answer to that is pretty obvious. No, the answer
just
is no.
Asking questions is sometimes completely legitimate when we have the answers and they're freely available, and we know from bitter experience that these ideas don't need to be discussed or these questions asked. Yeah, I agree.
But even if these fields were what Lindsay says they are, right? And this is this kind of gets into the larger. Even if gender studies and these kind of like postmodern neo-Marxist nonsense, even if it was just kind of full of this standpoint epistemology that has like nothing to say in the real world, and it's like kind of coming to infect other fields like science and engineering, even if that were true, which it's not, I want to be clear, that still doesn't say that we don't need to have conversations with the point is, again, when he was talking about Christian conservatives in 2015 and 2016, his answer was, we need to be taking their interest and their values into account, and saying like, well, hey, maybe these marginalized people who in this hypothetical are engaging in completely non-scientific, non-scholarly pursuits and are being encouraged by some system within the universities. Even if you were going to take that as valid, even if you were going to take that as true, wouldn't the answer be then what kinds of things are causing them to need to engage in this activity, and can we not provide support to them that allows them to enter the rarefied halls of science and reason with the rest of us? Isn't that the answer to this, James Lindsay? Wouldn't that really be the consistent response? Even if it were true, like I mean, it's not. None of this is true. I'm highlighting that here. But even if it were true, it wouldn't mean the things that he says it does. Is kind of where I'm landing on that.
You're pointing out very effectively that it's all based on just lies and bullshit. But it's the hypocrisy that rankles with me, because the claimed worldview the worldview that they claim for themselves and the worldview that they claim to be championing and defending is the worldview that ought to lead somebody to say, yeah, we work our way through all the ideas, even maybe the ones that turn out to be stupid. The existence of a stupid idea and a stupid proposition is not a scandal in and of itself.
Right. And I agree. And I agree, like philosophers, and people, people who live in the mind, people like I'm fine with people having conversations about like uncomfortable ideas or even disgusting ideas, vile ideas. I think that having that and being able to do that, that's an essential part of being reasonable and being an adult and having these things. And just in terms of like safe spaces, like I didn't play like the whole like safe spaces thing that they did on in the first bit of that 4.5 hour debate, but I have absorbed like more horrifying material than like anyone else involved in this conversation, right? You cannot do that without a safe space at some point, because a safe space is a place that you go when you need comfort for the rest of the work that you do. So
yeah, or just the existence you live as a person in a marginalized group. Yeah, no, they're just hypocrites. I just wanted to hit that because I think it's worth, I'm not even a liberal. And as usual, I have more respect for the best versions of liberalism than this kind of liberal.
Exactly. No, I absolutely agree. All right. So last couple of clips we're going to play. And the end of this episode is that not only did he appear on this Serious Inquiries Only podcast, but the last time that I can find of James Lindsay engaging with his critics in long form anywhere ever was a few weeks after this. And I believe, just again to put us somewhere in time, this is in mid-2017. I believe in between these two recordings from the Serious Inquiries Only and this new podcast, the Evergreen events involving Brett Weinstein happened. And they actually referenced them a couple of times, and I don't think I have any of it in the clips that I'm going to show for you, but they did reference it in the episode. And Unite the Right is about 6 weeks away, so this tells you what the political conversation is around this time. What the context is kind of going on here. So this is a podcast called Very Bad Wizards. And this is a psychologist and a philosopher having deep conversations about all sorts of things. And I'm going to say I don't much like this. I mean, it's fine. Like it has its moments. I've kind of dipped in and out of it a little bit here and there since like finding this clip just to get a sense of what this podcast is like. They did a 2-parter about IQ and the existence of G and the G factor and kind of hereditary and hypothesis, and they definitely fall on what I think is the wrong side of that debate. In this podcast that we're going to play, talking about the Conceptual Penis hoax, these guys agree with James Lindsay about the kind of fundamental value of critical theory and gender studies. And they actually agree with James Lindsay about what James Lindsay agrees with and thinks about these fields. Mm-hmm. And even they call bullshit on him. This is, if you're going to check this out, this is Very Bad Wizards. This is episode 118 called We Don't Love Them Hoax. I'll skip ahead about to the 38-minute point because they do kind of an intro to every episode, and then they do like an interview or they do kind of a main conversation. So you want to probably skip the first bit of it, which is not interesting for our purposes. But this is a gold mine. If you want to understand James Lindsay, you want to understand where James Lindsay is now, this is a really, really great place to start.
You did submit it to one gender studies journal who rejected it without sending it out for peer review. The pay per published journal that it was, the open access journal that it was published in, is not a gender studies journal. So in what sense do you think you have drawn attention to or provided evidence for your initial
suspicion? So let me ask a kind of simple question. I'll ask, I guess, two of them. Why is Melissa McCarthy's portrayal of Sean Spicer on Saturday Night Live, A, so funny, and B, so effective at what it does? And secondly, and related, why is the television show Portlandia, which satirizes life in the city of Portland, so funny and so effective?
What just happened?
I promise you, there is no cut there. There is no cut. There is no cut that I did. I am not making him sound this stupid. I promise you, I'm not making him sound this stupid. Lindsay is making a point about satire and, you know, like the value of satire in terms of drawing attention to things. I want to just like quote here and say, this is the most 2017 reference imaginable in that, like, you know, Melissa McCarthy driving the Sean Spicer desk on SNL.
Yeah.
And Portlandia. Those are his two examples of like really spot on hitting satire. This is what happens when you study math for 10 years and never crack a book. Like, just to let you know, like, this is actually what happens. I was going to say, like, I kind of like James, Lindsay, and I are about the same age. We have kind of similar backgrounds. He went further in academia than I did, but we both have STEM backgrounds. We're from relatively kind of the same general area. I lived within a couple of hours of him for, you know, a number of years. His accent, I think, even sounds a bit like mine. So, you know, we can, you know, all of that stuff we can kind of, you know, I have some identification with this man. I have known so many fucking people with like advanced degrees in like a STEM field who have exactly this level of like cultural understanding of the world around them. So
yeah,
he is a very, very standard, like, I have a math degree, I have an engineering degree, and I'm from like Middle Tennessee. Very, very standard. And the fact that he's like going like, why is Melissa McCarthy's performance on SNL the greatest thing I've ever seen? It's just it's just God tier. It's God tier. Okay. Continuing with the clip here.
I may question both of those premises.
I think Portland is hilarious. But, you know, here's a case where one could say that the field has successfully withstood the attack of publishing gibberish. And given that any field with these sort of predatory journals will publish anything, that it is equivalent to zero. And perhaps even a point in favor of the editorial staff of Norma for rejecting you. Otherwise, you have an unfalsifiable claim, right? Which is just, well, we wrote a gibberish piece of satire. The publication of that piece isn't what is making any illustration.
So submit that to McSweeney's or The Onion or whatever. Not
right,
but that's not the way it was portrayed.
Does it count as a point in favor of gender studies? I don't think it does. And the reason is that we didn't write a particularly sneaky hoax. As a matter of fact, we wrote an absolutely ridiculous pastiche. The question becomes, if you want to defend gender studies on the charges of morally biased views and obscurantist language, it's going to require, I think, and I always thought this, a slightly sneakier paper. Of course, the more obnoxious the